Washington Post. And we're going to get a lot of bad press, and so we need to be able to actually explain to people in the church and in our communities what just happened, and where do we go from here as a church. I can tell you, joining the Wesleyan Covenant Association will make you really popular with a lot of people. It's just done wonders for my image. But I got on early on because I wrote a piece for the United Methodist Reporter a couple of years ago that basically said the denomination's already split. We just haven't divided up the assets. We have different standards de facto for ordination, different standards for the consecration of bishops. And we got two choices. We can either try to put it back together, or we can split. We can formalize the split that's already happened. But to some extent, the rupture that's occurred, I think, is probably irreparable. And we're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. Even if we keep a large section of the United Methodist Church together, we're going to lose parts of the church. I mean, that might be the best case scenario.
Might be the best thing.
Yeah. I mean, and we're the last major Protestant denomination to do this in the U.S. I mean, the Southern Baptists did in the 80s. The Anglican Episcopalians have gone through this, the Lutherans, the Presbyterians, they've all gone through this already. UMC hasn't because we have such a strong we have such strong evangelical voices in the United Methodist Church. But it's finally caught up with us.
Anybody else?
I guess I do have a question about the African.
Yeah.
They make up a third, but I doubt there's a lot of money coming from there. So they're supported primarily from the states. So what happens there? I mean, do we wind up losing a big piece when, monies go flying in several directions?
Well, that's interesting.
I mean, those are converts that are kind of going to get lost in the mix. They have a strong vote right now, but,
Yeah, I mean, within 10 years, they'll be controlling the finances of the denomination, which might not be a bad thing. I mean, think of it this way, okay? 20% of our denomination lives in the Congo. That's an area as large as the United States east of the Mississippi River. And they have 4 bishops. We got 5 bishops in the western jurisdiction of the UMC. In the North Georgia Annual Conference, there are more United Methodists than in the whole western jurisdiction. And so it's just a ridiculously unequal distribution of resources. I mean, they have 4 and with 500 miles of paved road in the Congo, like the whole thing, and they got 4 bishops to govern that whole area. That's ridiculous. Well, why do we do that? Because we don't want the Africans to get a majority within the Council of Bishops. We have every one of our United Methodist theological schools, some of which are teaching things that most people in the United Methodist Church would not believe, gets close to $1 million a year. Most of the theological schools in Africa get next to nothing, except Africa University, which we have Americanized to the extent that the Zimbabwe Annual Conference will not accept ordination candidates from Africa University anymore because I think they're not effective. This place in which we poured all our money. So we need to lose control of some of our finances. Last annual general conference, we allocated $5 million to theological education in Africa. That wouldn't have happened without a strong African delegation coming in. The Africans are organized now. They're led by a guy named Jerry Kula, who's also with the Wesleyan Covenant Association. He's a Liberian delegate. Jerry Kula is probably the most influential United Methodist in the world at this point. He is providing some very strong leadership in getting the Africans organized, so that they are communicating with each other, they understand the issues, and they are voting as a bloc. He's a smart guy.
Is it accurate that about 90% of the funding comes from the U.S. right now?
At least 90% of the funding comes from the U.S., yeah.
Is that just for Africa or for everything?
For everything. I mean, we have churches in Asia and churches in Latin America, but they're just not able to provide the level of funding that we can. Of course, it's only a matter of time before we can't provide this level of funding either, unless we reverse our decline. I mean, Ed Stetzer wrote a piece called Mainline Protestantism Has 23 Easters Left. He says, by the current rate of decline, what we call the mainline Protestant tradition in the U.S. will be all but dead in 23 years. And we will, to the extent that Christianity moves on in North America, will be displaced by Pentecostals and Catholics. And a lot of these coming from immigrant populations. So, I mean, there should be a sense of urgency about renewing our mission in all United Methodist churches. But I don't think most people understand the level of urgency that there really is. I mean, we cannot take for granted that Christianity is going to continue to thrive in a nation where we don't evangelize.
Do you think there are level enough heads to work through this?
I mean, the people that I have worked with, on the whole, not everyone, but on the whole, have been pretty level-headed. But there are some people who are just histrionic. I mean, they just are almost impossible to work with. And I think that at some point, the level heads will prevail, but we're going to have to be patient in working through all the emotional issues.
Yeah, I kind of meant on both sides.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So far, that hasn't been the case.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess one question about the depression one. I figured since we've already gone this route.
Yeah, why not?
As society trends towards liberalism on especially sexuality and homosexuality, if the church makes the traditional decision when it comes to same-sex marriage along with sexuality and homosexuality, obviously the outside, New York Times, Washington Post will label the church as a group of bigots. There's no way around it. It's already happening.
Yeah, right.
Now, so I'm not saying that's what should be the primary driver in any decision. Obviously, the Bible teaches us that the world looks at things one way and God looks at things another way. But I'm sure you've already taken into account that there's another storm on the horizon even if we go in the traditional route, because the next step is going to be that the Methodist Church chose traditionalism, which is not to be called traditionalism, it's going to be called, chose bigotry towards homosexuality. I guess, I don't know if it's, I'll put a question mark on the end and say, if what, how do we navigate, if this, then this, how do we navigate that part if we choose to go the traditional way?
We didn't write the Bible.
No question.
I mean, I think we have some good exemplars of how to do this. One is Tim Keller. I mean, Tim Keller's he's a very conservative Christian with a lot of grace and just handled himself in a very soft-spoken way. Another is Bishop Robert Barron, the Roman Catholic bishop. Handles himself in the same way. You know, I think that Christianity, insofar as it survives in Western culture, will have to become a countercultural movement. And that's going to be more difficult, than the world we grew up in. That's the way Christianity is in a lot of the world. Our friends in Cuba are dealing with this all the time. And we're going to have to get serious about our identity as Christians in a culture that does not share our values. And Jesus said this is going to happen. I mean, this is what Jesus told us would be the normal. If the world hated you, know that it hated me before you. And I've already been on the receiving end of a lot of this because I'm on the governing council of the WCA. And people will come after you viciously. So you got to be ready for that. But what's the alternative? The alternative is not to be faithful. If what you believe is that God designed human sexuality to take place between men and women, if that's what you believe, then capitulation to a culture is not an option. And whatever happens, we have to be faithful. And I actually think that when the church has been faithful in times where it has been at odds with the culture, that's when the church has really grown. So I've been to places like Vietnam and Cuba where the church is definitely the Methodists there are a very countercultural group, and they're growing. People want to know their God because they're seeing lives getting changed.
Anybody else?
Question I want to put to you, but I don't want to do it publicly, if you would make a point of hanging around.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, to close, I just want to say a lot of this is just not within our control, and we have to just hold it in prayer, keep cool, not lose our temper with people that may tempt us to do that. And I really believe that God is birthing a new Methodist movement out of this crisis, and that what humans will use for evil, God will use for good. So even though I'm not particularly optimistic about the institution we call the United Methodist Church, I'm extremely optimistic about the Wesleyan movement within North America. And I think it's going to be reborn in a really powerful way in the years to come. I just hope I'm around to see it.
I think David had talked about the hope of pruning, that can come out of this, and that's very much where I live. That I think that God is certainly not done with our church and countless other local United Methodist churches. I don't know what the future of the denomination is, but I know that we're made up of many, many strong churches that are doing great work. And I think that there are things that, you know, we're a denomination that's been in decline since we began, and we've become a bloated system that struggles to manage itself. From things like what Brady and I were talking about earlier about the problems of guaranteed appointment. You know, where you have when pastors are ordained, we're guaranteed jobs until we're 70 years old, unless we have some massive moral failing. So you can be generally ineffective at your work, and yet we can't tell you that you're done. You know, that's a massive problem. Now, most of our pastors are very solid, but you know, some that are just very lazy, and they know that there's nothing that can be done about that. That's a huge problem, you know, that drives down churches, because those folks get sent to somebody's church, even if it's not a massive church, they get sent somewhere. You get the financial waste that David was talking about. You get a system of itineracy that worked at one point in a very different culture that was built for single income families before there were automobiles. A lot of the world has changed since then, and I think that the unfortunate